In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing this show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube.
Welcome to the Perspectrum. I'm Nathan Seelove.
And I'm Michael Bloom.
And we have a super exciting show for you all today. We are going to talk about the midterm election and discuss some of our final arguments as we lead up to it, and also give some final analysis about what we think will happen, or how we have no idea what will happen because it's completely up in the air. Then we're going to talk about Liz Truss. Who is that, you might ask? Well, that right there is the only British prime minister to lose to a head of lettuce. And you'll understand what I mean a little bit later. And then we're going to have a discussion about why Americans can't seem to comprehend the idea that we might be able to learn from other countries.
Ourselves included, I will say.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Super excited.
Yeah.
Before we get started, we'd just like to give a huge shout out to our good friends, Debbie and Jerry over at It's Another Sunday podcast for 100 episodes. Mm-hmm. And for their 100th episode, they had Michael and I on it. And we got to talk about podcasting, and it was a lot of fun. So head over there and give them some love.
Yeah, absolutely. We also want to talk about another huge milestone on the show.
Yes.
So you may or may not know, we've recently started publishing YouTube videos of our segments. So if you're ever interested in a segment and you just want to listen to that one, or you want to share it with someone, you can always go to our YouTube. You can just search the Perspectrum on YouTube. But since we've started to do this, we've gotten some traction on YouTube, including one of the most important milestones for any YouTube content producer: trolls. So we wanted to give some air to our favorite trolly comments from our most recent uploads of our YouTube videos. So Nathan, what is one of your favorites?
Oh, my favorite, and we're not going to say names because, we
don't want to draw attention to the trolls, just how fun they are. It's so fun. This is like such a point of pride.
Yeah. So one said, this was in response to our Herschel Walker video, our last Herschel Walker video. D-bag equals two YouTube losers speaking to you right now. They will teabag each other afterwards. Sick.
I wonder if the sick was like sick as in that's cool, or like
well,
sick as in
maybe
that's
they're not
sick,
a troll.
that's
then.
gross.
Maybe they're not a troll.
Yeah.
I just want to make a important clarification though. All right, Michael and I do not teabag each other after we record. I mean, after you record, it's just so you're so tired.
Yeah, exactly.
And you just don't want to have any major physical activity. So we teabag each other before we start recording.
Exactly. It's personally offensive that they don't think that I teabag myself. Come on. What
about yours, Michael?
My favorite one is, quote, "You can see the estrogen seeping out of these soy boys."
That one's actually creative.
I think that's why I like it.
Soy generates estrogen, right? Or like it has.
Well, it's a molecule, I believe, that's similar to estrogen, and so it can sometimes cause
So that one's actually kind of creative.
I know, very creative. Now, of course, it's like this demonization of soy and like estrogen and womanhood and all that stuff. It's not good, but it's very creative.
What's not creative though, Michael?
What's that?
The COVID numbers.
Oh, that's true. They're pretty much bad every week. So switch it up, COVID. Come on. So worldwide, we've hit 634 million total cases, with average daily new cases of 352,000 over the last 7 days. So that's compared to 413,000 average new cases per day, or down 15% from the week before. In terms of death, worldwide, we've hit 6.59 million deaths, with average daily new deaths over the last 7 days of 1,173, up 5% from 1,114 the week before. In terms of worldwide vaccinations, we've hit 68.4% of the population with one dose and 63.1% with two doses, each up just about 0.1% from the week before. In the US, we've hit a total of 99.2 million total cases, with average daily new cases of 27,000, which is actually up 4% from 26,000 the week before. In terms of total deaths, we've hit 1.094 million, with average daily deaths over the last 7 days of 199, which is flat from the week before. And in terms of vaccination in the US, we have 79.8% of the US population with at least one dose, and 68.3% with that second dose of the vaccine.
How about that?
Yeah. But you know what's not just the same as last week and just kind of a little bit boring, like the COVID numbers?
What, Michael?
God damn it, it's the midterms.
Yeah, and the midterms aren't like they were last week
Or last month.
or last. It's all over the fucking place.
It's all over the place.
And I'm not gonna lie to y'all. It's not looking good right now.
Yeah.
It's really not looking good.
So we're about 2 weeks away from election night. A number of states have already started early voting, but we can't count any of those ballots, so we won't know any of the even preliminary or already cast results until after election day.
Yeah,
but yeah, it doesn't look good.
It does seem to be a general tendency that early voting is primarily Democrats, or at least is mostly Democrats, and the voting on election day is mostly Republicans. At least that's been the tendency in the last election. That was the tendency in the last election. And I mean, maybe it is good news that there are a record number of early voting. There is a record number of early voting. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's promising. But as it stands, overall polls are not great.
They're not
great for Democrats.
Yeah.
The 538 average currently has Republicans ahead by 0.6 points after the Democrats had been ahead for quite a while, actually.
Yeah, for a few weeks.
That being said, I say that, but then I look at the last 5 polls. A Big Village poll has Democrats up by 4 points. Another one has them up by 4 points. Echelon Insights has them up by 2 points. And another Echelon Insights has Democrats up by 3 points.
And is this all of the generic ballot, or is this production of election outcomes?
This is generic ballot for Congress specifically.
Gotcha. Yep.
So basically, which party would you support in the election for controlling Congress? And the thing is, the other thing to recognize is that because of gerrymandering, in order for Democrats to keep control of the House, they can't just win. They have to win by probably several points.
Yeah.
And based on that average, that's not looking super likely. Mm-hmm. Now, to be clear, everything could change. Yeah. Oftentimes, polling data is often always set up to account for what happened in the last election. Mm-hmm. And that means that it can always be off by a little bit, which means that if it's really close, it could very easily be an almost a 5-point margin of error. Mm-hmm. So it's very possible that the Republicans could end up winning by 5 points, or the Democrats could end up winning by 5 points.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen, especially in the House.
Yeah. Yeah, I think especially in the House. One thing that makes the generic ballot more representative for the House is, a couple things. One, all the House seats are up for grabs. That's key. Two, their House seats are proportioned according to population. So we've got kind of a representative thing there. But we're on the Senate side, there's a few things that are kind of coming together to make it more likely that Democrats will overperform their national average polling on the Senate side. But still, 538 has a pretty much a dead heat between Democrats and Republicans, with predicted 52% chance that Democrats would control the Senate and a 48% chance that Republicans would control it. And that's with the fact that 21 Republican seats are up versus only 14 Democratic seats. So, yeah. And so basically, like, there's like an 80% chance that Democrats will hold between 47 and 53 seats in the Senate by the time this is all done. So really, like, whichever party wins like 2 of the 3 like closest Senate races will control the Senate.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of those races have tightened up a little bit.
Way too many of them. It's driving me fucking nuts.
Yeah. Pennsylvania's tightened up a little bit, although I can't see Dr. Oz winning in Pennsylvania. I do not see that happening.
Yeah.
Georgia's definitely tightened up.
Mm-hmm.
However, in terms of average polling, Warnock is still up by 2 points in Georgia. So that is still important context.
Yeah, and as you alluded to, like, we saw kind of a peak of expected Democratic performance, especially in the Senate, in like the September timeframe. You know, a baseline prediction for a midterm election, as we've told our audience before, is that the party in power would lose seats. This has happened like pretty much every election since like the 1940s, or every midterm election anyway. And this time, like, it looked like there was going to be a pretty significant Democratic upset, where we probably wouldn't control the House. There's pretty much been, you know, no point at which it looked like Democrats were going to win the House, but we would have like a higher chance of controlling the Senate. Never by too many seats, but usually a more likely polling that we would control the Senate, and that's based on the polling from each of those Senate seats that are up for grabs and the likelihood that the Democratic candidate would win that seat. But what we've seen since September is like a general decline in Democrats' popularity, and as Nathan mentioned, in each of these key states, a decline in the outlook for the Democratic candidate. So we saw that at their peak, 538 predicted that Democrats had a 71% chance of controlling the Senate, and now the expectation is, as I mentioned, that 52% chance. And to Nathan's point, like, in Georgia, we saw that Warnock at like the peak had like a 20% chance lead above Walker, and that has declined to just a couple of points at this point. And that's despite like Walker getting like a couple of scandals, like more unpopular.
Yeah.
But we see this I think we're seeing this driving force of like the salience of like issues that are kind of weak for Democrats getting the front seat.
Yeah. Yeah. Which at this point, the weakest issue for Democrats, and again, I'm not saying that this is because of reality, I'm saying this is perception. The weakest point is inflation.
Yeah.
All right. Democrats are much more likely to be blamed for current inflation. And honestly, that's often just the nature of the economy.
Yeah.
Inflation is one of the easiest things for the everyday person to be able to see. And the everyday person is probably not going to think through the nuances and the intricacies of, well, you know, there was a supply chain, and then there was a war in Ukraine where we cut off our trade with Russia, and then OPEC cut their cut their supply of fossil fuels to the world. Like, they're probably not thinking through that.
Yeah.
They're probably seeing the number on the gas station, the face in the White House, Biden's face in the White House, the D next to his name, and think, oh, well, I guess that's why this is happening.
Yeah. And important to our last segment, one thing they're probably not comparing is U.S. inflation to international inflation, which is one of the strongest points against pointing towards the Democrats as being the driving force behind that inflation.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, I won't say that in terms of inflation that the United States is performing significantly better than most countries. Biden made that point in a speech recently, and it's not entirely true, but it's definitely better than several other countries. I mean, looking at the United States as it stands, the United States inflation rate is 8.5%. Now compare that to the United Kingdom, 10.1%. Which,
well, we'll get to what's fucking them over in a minute.
To be fair, we'll get to what's fucking them over, because I mean, you know, you also compare gas prices. The price of natural gas in the United States is up 30.5%. Regular gasoline is up 44.6%. In the UK, natural gas prices rose by 95.7%.
Jeez.
So
Oh,
shit's
man.
happening. Canada, inflation rose by 7.6%. So we're about on par with them. China, it only rose by 2.7%. In Japan, 2.6%. In Turkey, inflation jumped 79.6%. So we're definitely doing better than Turkey.
Yeah.
Australia, 6.1%. South Africa, 7.8%. Israel, 5.2%. So I would say that I would probably put the United States in the middle in terms of how much inflation has actually risen.
Yeah.
Which again doesn't necessarily mean that it's doing better, but it also means that the rest of the world is either in the same boat, slightly better, or a lot worse.
Yeah. And we've talked about inflation in the past and some of the driving forces behind it. You know, you might argue that some degree it's like it was like federal support for in the form of like COVID relief. You know, obviously Republicans took those actions as well. Democrats, did that last bill. So people can argue like the effect of that.
That effect is clearly an incredibly minor effect. It's not the driving force.
Yeah, exactly. And part of the reason why it's clearly not the driving force is that international point. So even places that didn't do as significant, support for like economic support, like they still are seeing inflation. Like I wonder what the commonality is among like the whole world in seeing inflation. Maybe it's the fucking international pandemic.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
and
or
the other
war
thing
in Russia, Ukraine.
Yeah, or both. and the other thing that's going against the story about it being just everybody being flush with cash is that we've like significantly increased interest rates, right? Like the Fed has taken the actions that the Fed should take, has been really zealous about it, increased interest rates more than like any time in recent memory. And it's not curbing inflation already, right? Like it's not significantly changing inflation. If it were about the money supply in the economy, that would have a much larger impact.
Yeah.
So it's much more likely that it is about the supply side and reducing and like just having less stuff available. And Congress can do some stuff for that, maybe, but not much. Like maybe they could like lower standards, right? They could like make it easier for people to transport goods using like, with fewer checks or like less, with less fuel standards or something like that. But like, there's not that much that Congress or the president can do to affect that supply side in the short term.
Yeah. But again, it's difficult to see those nuances when all you're seeing are gas prices creeping up.
Exactly.
And the thing is, we saw the polling was best for Democrats when inflation was on a steady decrease and when Democrats were racking up victories left and right. All right. When Democrats were forgiving student debt, when Democrats were passing the Inflation Reduction Act, when Democrats were passing the CHIPS Act, when Democrats were passing the PAC Act.
Yeah.
We saw poll numbers go up. Now, I feel like when that happened, Democrats kind of had this attitude of, all right, well, we've done enough. Let's run on that.
Yeah.
And stick with it. And yes, you should run on that. You should keep running on that. But I mean, I think that it was a bad idea to just stop right there. Because what ended up happening was the thing with OPEC, gas prices started creeping up, and predictably, poll numbers for Republicans started going up.
Yeah.
Poll numbers for Democrats started going down. Approval rating for Joe Biden started going down. So we can't be at the whims of gas prices like this all the time, which also means that the Democrats really should have spent some time focusing on like addressing the root of the problem, which is the fossil fuel industry. It's fossil fuels. All right. If we could get off this dependence on fossil fuels, then we wouldn't be at the whim of gas prices every single goddamn time there's any economic problem.
Yeah.
All right. We wouldn't be freaking out about being able to fill up our car every time there's any type of inflation or any type of conflict that between a country that has gas, or when another country decides they're going to cut the amount of oil that they send to us. All right. There is a major economic advantage to arguing for renewable energy. And that is a Democrat issue. All right. That is a Democrat issue that is popular. So if you really wanted to make a solid response against the Republican accusations about gas prices, you can say, all right, yes, we can try to pass laws or try to, maybe pass laws about price gouging, which, by the way, Republicans all voted against. We can try to pass laws in order to increase the supply, or we can release federal oil reserves. But at the end of the day, the root of the problem is that our economy is way too dependent on fossil fuels in order to function properly. And that should be the primary focus. All right? Make the argument that was one of our major focuses in the Inflation Reduction Act. And you can also make the argument that's not just about trying to reduce this inflation, that's about trying to reduce future inflation, which, by the way, Kevin McCarthy, he's saying he wants to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. All right? He wants to prevent us from taking steps to get off of fossil fuels that basically control our economy. All right? We're going to pass more legislation. We're going to take further steps towards that goal of getting us off of this. That's the argument.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, we had some good early wins, and importantly, like the Dobbs decision, in my view, like really undermined the Republicans' like potential lead, and it put them in the position of legislating by being even the party in the minority. They were they basically asserting this huge policy priority despite not having control in Congress. I think that did us some favors, but to your point, I think we failed to sustain. And I think part of that is the Republicans really are, I think, winning the argument on the economy, and they're increasing the salience of these issues where they tend to be more favored.
Yeah.
Certainly by swing voters. So the economy and crime is increased in salience. They've effectively made that kind of a central issue, which is yes, there's been an increase in crime. It started under the Trump administration. It's pretty clearly linked to the pandemic. And it's also
it's also worse in Republican areas.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and that's the federal government really does not have that big of an impact on crime rate.
Exactly.
And, we've talked about this before. The crime rate is pretty similar, if not even worse, in a lot of Republican areas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's a completely ridiculous idea. It's a completely ridiculous argument that Democrats have not been doing a good job of debunking.
Yeah. I think that's a real uniting theme. There's something about I think Democrats are just not nearly as on the attack on these key things as they should be. And Democrat and Republicans who have a natural advantage because they don't hold the clear reins of power on these issues are able to go on the offensive on those things. And the thing is, I think what's really interesting about these cases, especially in the Senate, is it's so clear that all of this is being driven by the national conversation rather than the specifics of these races. Like in Pennsylvania with Fetterman versus Oz, people, pundits are talking about, well, Fetterman had this stroke back in May, and so maybe people are losing confidence in him, and it's guys, his polling maxed out in September at an 83% lead over Oz, but it's declined since September to a 59% lead, with 59 to 41.
In terms of likelihood of winning.
Yeah, exactly, based on 538. And so it's guys, no, it's not the stroke. It's the national conversation. Same thing, even in places where we're not predicted to win, like Ohio, where 538 has J.D. Vance, the Republican candidate, with a 76% chance of winning at this point versus Tim Ryan's 24% chance, right? Tim Ryan's not going to win that race. But even that race where we're losing has declined right? Tim Ryan is going to lose by more or has a worse chance than he did at the peak in September.
Yeah.
It is these national conversations. The same thing with Mark Kelly, a popular candidate running against a like self-proclaimed nationalist, right?
Yeah.
Kelly has a 69% chance of winning according to 538 at this point, down from an 83% chance in September.
Yeah.
Like Democrats have to be united on fighting these national conversations, or we're losing the issue, the war on these issues that really matter to swing voters.
Yeah. Which, by the way, you mentioned something that I want to correct myself on in a previous podcast. Last time we did our podcast, we did our midterm predictions. Things were actually looking pretty good for Tim Ryan in Ohio. I'm going to go ahead and change my prediction and say he's going to lose that. I do think it's actually, I think it might be relatively close, but like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and change that prediction, but I'm going to keep all my other predictions. All right. Which, to remind you, my prediction in terms of the more competitive races, I think Wisconsin is going to be won by the Republican. I think that Arizona is going to be won by the Democrat. I think Pennsylvania is going to be won by the Democrat. I do actually think that in the end, in Georgia, I do think Warnock's going to win. Probably by only a little bit, but I think I do think he's going to end up winning.
Yeah. I just think it's a losing argument for Walker to say that he's more godly than the preacher, but like that's just me.
Yeah. And Nevada, this was the one that you and I disagreed on. I'm still going to maintain. I think the Democrat's going to win. I do think that the final breakdown is going to be 51-49. That being said, that means that we don't override Joe Manchin and Sinema.
Yeah.
And that right there, I think, was one of the biggest mistakes that I think Democrats made, was that they didn't make the race a competition against both the Republicans and those two. All right. Because here's the thing. The argument that they were making of elect us and we'll do all this stuff, it feels disingenuous to the people.
Yeah, it falls on deaf ears, yeah.
It feels disingenuous to the people that felt betrayed when they worked so hard to try to get Democrats in charge of all three parts of government, the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so many things got blocked. All right, so many important things got blocked. There were some okay things that got passed, but you weren't able to codify Roe versus Wade because of those two pieces of shit.
Yep.
You weren't able to codify marriage equality. You weren't able to pass the Build Back Better plan. The Inflation Reduction Act was an extremely watered down version of that. You completely abandoned a public option. Like, I don't even know what happened with a public option. That was one.
It was immediately turned off. It was like they were like closing up the campaign shop after Biden was elected, turning off the lights, and they're like, might as well just throw this public option in the trash on the way out.
Yeah, like, and I feel like that's something that you could pretty easily make an argument for reconciliation with, but you didn't even try.
Yeah,
you didn't even fucking try to pass it. And healthcare was one of the biggest issues in the Democratic primary. You were arguing, Joe Biden was arguing about how star-spangled awesome a public option would be, and then he fucking dropped it.
Yeah.
Like, healthcare is one of the biggest issues in this country, and it's an issue that Democrats are viewed much more favorably on.
Yep.
And you fucking dropped it.
Yeah.
What the hell's the logic there?
I think that's such a strong point. For those who don't know, Manchin and Sinema are not up for re-election, or they're not up in this election, right? So they're not on the table. But to be able to say, Nathan, to your point, to be able to say we were blocked by conservative members of our party, the only way we still can deliver all of these things you want, what we need is the Senate.
Yeah. Now, Biden has said, like, give us 2 more senators. Like, he has said that to his credit. And in fact, I think that Biden himself has probably done a better job than any of the than most of the Democratic leadership in Congress has in terms of campaigning. But that main focus of the message had to be like, these two are blocking us.
Yeah.
All right, give us those 2 more seats and we can override these people, because we're running against the Republican Party, and the Republican Party has 2 additional members in Democratic clothing.
Yeah.
They are the enemies. They're the reason why we can't pass abortion. They're the reason why we couldn't pass Build Back Better. Fucking cinema is the reason why we had to take out a fucking closing of a tax loophole for hedge fund managers. Like, these 2 are corrupt pieces of shit, and we need to override their power. Now, why didn't they make that argument? Well, the simple reason is that there are plenty of other Democrats that are in Congress that might not be as corrupt, but are still corrupt in very similar ways.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So with all of that being said, it might feel like we're saying that there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans, or that like the Democrats are completely useless, or there would be no advantage to Democrats maintaining control of Congress. That is not what we're saying. And in fact, I do just want to make the argument that there are still things that Democrats can do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are things that in order to make them do it, we need to be activists. All right. We had to bully Biden into the student loan forgiveness. All right. We had to, poll numbers kind of forced Biden's hand in passing something with the Inflation Reduction Act, and Schumer with the maneuver that he did. All right. So we do still have to push them into doing the right thing if we do end up allowing Democrats to maintain control of Congress.
Yeah.
But that's never going to happen with Republicans.
Yeah.
Right? Republicans take 1 chamber of Congress, and all hopes for any type of progress whatsoever is done for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
All right. Nothing is going to improve. There will be no legislative change that will actually make a huge difference in the next 2 years.
Yeah. In fact, it's probably even worse than that. So like, when I think about the House, I'm like, well, there's an 80% chance the Democrats lose the House, according to 538 at this point. That sucks. They only need to pick up 5 seats on net to control the House. That sucks. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully the polls are wrong. We still have to get out and vote, and that's the thing that all of us can do. And canvass and, advocate and tell your friends to vote and all that stuff. But at the same time, I was thinking we have both chambers today, and there's no way they're going to get a veto-proof majority, right? So, what are they really going to be able to do? If they hold the chamber, if they hold the House, is that really a problem? Even if they hold the House and the Senate, they can't override a veto. So it's not like they can do really bad stuff. Like, progress stops, but it's not like they can really hurt us, except for something really important. One thing that even if they just hold the House will be really difficult. And that's the fact that the Democrats care about running the country.
Yeah.
And Republicans, elected Republicans by and large, don't. So bills to fund the government, to raise the debt ceiling, to deal with military issues, just to keep the government functioning will become very fraught. And the fact that we know that from past experience, the Democrats are dedicated to keeping the government open and not defaulting on our debt and causing an international economic crisis means that, and the Republicans know this too, means that they will use those bills to pass stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe not everything, maybe not stuff that's that crazy, but they will do harm through that process, even if they just control 1 chamber. And worst case scenario, maybe they'll win over Kyrsten Sinema or Joe Manchin in the Senate, or more conservative people, and pass some hopefully not too heinous stuff. But ultimately, even if they control 1 chamber, they can still pass stuff. They can still negotiate, and they still have leverage. So we need to do everything we can to prevent that. Even though it seems pretty likely that they're going to take the House, we just have to really push to try to prevent that.